First to our top focus in this edition, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has reached the Russian city of Sochi for an informal summit with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Prime Minister's visit to Sochi coming at the invitation of President Putin. Prime Minister Modi's Russia visit also coming just weeks after he held an informal summit with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. The two countries are likely to discuss ways to tackle terrorism, also the US withdrawal from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and its fallout on the trade with Iran, among other issues that are expected to come up for discussion. Prime Minister Modi has expressed hope that the one-day summit with the Russian leader will strengthen the special and privileged quote-unquote strategic partnership between the two countries. According to reports, the two leaders may also hold talks on the upcoming Shanghai Cooperation Organisation and the BRICS summits.
You see, Iran is a very important subject. There have been recent developments with regard to the nuclear agreement with Iran. This is a subject of discussion among various countries, and I am sure that this will come up for discussion between Russia and India, because both Russia and India, we have relations with Iran of different kinds, and we both have big stakes in Iran. So yes, Iran will be a subject of discussion to review what has happened and how do we go ahead in the future.
India and Russia are engaged in a trilateral nuclear development program with Bangladesh. Both India and Russia are also expected to discuss furthering of this trilateral peaceful nuclear development project.
Bangladesh government is building the Rupur nuclear power plant. There we have recently signed an agreement between India, Russia and Bangladesh to cooperate trilaterally in the Rupur plant. This is the first such example. And the Russian side is interested, and so are we, in working in other countries also in a similar fashion, where Russian expertise, Indian expertise can be merged, brought together, and we can develop this kind of cooperation in third countries.
Joining us in our studio for more on that is former Indian diplomat, Ambassador Arun Singh. Ambassador, first, two back-to-back informal summits that the Indian Prime Minister has been engaged in, first with the Chinese President and now with the Russian President. Informality, it seems, is the flavor of the month. What does that really tell you about the Indian leader's priorities and the way in which he is choosing to lead these discourses?
So I see his visit to Sochi in the context of course, the informal summit that you referred to in April with the Chinese President Xi, but also in the context of his visit in April itself to meet the German Chancellor Angela Merkel in Germany, and in June last year to meet French President Macron. He had made these visits to President Macron and to Chancellor Merkel soon after they had been re-elected. In the case of President Macron, he had been elected, to show that in the new term and in the new role, he wanted to go and establish relations, because these are very important partnerships. In the case of Russia, President Putin has been re-elected for his fourth term and was inaugurated on 7th of May. So I think it was important, given the strategic nature of the India-Russia relationship, the importance of the partnership with Russia for us, to reach out to President Putin soon after his re-election, because President Putin has a lot of authority in Russia, and therefore to take the relationship forward, this engagement was important. And putting it in the context of the Chinese visit, that was described as discussing things in a broad and long-term perspective, not getting bogged down in the day-to-day issues and difficulties. And I think similarly with President Putin, the attempt is to look at things in the longer term, especially with the tremendous global flux taking place. Because there's a lot of change happening in the world. The relationship between US and many of its partners is under challenge. The relationship between US and Europe is under challenge. There's a lot of volatility in the US-China relationship. There is a lot of tension in the US and Russia relationship. So given all this, where do we take the India-Russia relationship in the immediate and the medium and longer term?
So, and with informality and with the agenda-less format of these talks also comes a lot of speculation, naturally, given that there is no set agenda over what is expected to be discussed. Among the various issues doing the rounds, first and foremost, the US withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement and its immediate fallout on the trade with Iran. Also, Russia's relationship with China and Pakistan, given also the US sanctions that are doing the rounds. So all of that, according to you, expected to be on agenda?
They're bound to be, and all of these are very important issues. So our Prime Minister had visited Russia in June last year, and it is expected that President Putin would come to India on a bilateral visit before the end of the year. So the more detailed issues of bilateral cooperation would probably be discussed there, and outcomes come out of that. But with all the changes happening in the world, I think one important area of discussion certainly would be the US sanctions on Russia. Under the present US sanctions of Russia, if India buys anything major from Russia, including defense equipment, technically the US can sanction the Indian entities involved in that cooperation. Now, that is certainly something that would not be acceptable to India. And the Indian government has indicated that we would not allow any third party to influence our cooperation with Russia. So that's a challenge that has to be addressed. And in its own interest, US would need to ensure that it doesn't complicate relations with India by going down this path. So this is certainly an important area for discussion. Also Iran. US is moving ahead with sanctions with Iran. As of August 6th this year, there'll be no dollar-related transactions permitted for any trade with Iran. As of November 4, every 6 months, expectation would be that there should be 15 to 20% reduction every 6 months in oil and energy imports from Iran. And then the payment for that will become a problem because you can't pay in dollars. European and other banks become a little cautious because they don't want to be sanctioned by the US. So with all this and the Chabahar port, where we are looking at investment in terms of access to Afghanistan, that could be complicated. So with all this, how do you address this issue and how do we look at talking to Russia, Europe and other parts of the world to advance this process would certainly be an area. We have some concerns in how Russia has been approaching Pakistan, because traditionally Russia has not been a supplier of military equipment to Pakistan. But as India is widening its options, Russia is also looking at widening its options, and they have committed to supply 4 helicopters to Pakistan, which is symbolic, but symbolism is important because so far they've not supplied any military equipment. They have come out with statements saying that Pakistan's efforts with in the context of terrorism should be understood. They are making a lot of effort. They have reached out to the Taliban, according to most reports. They've held meetings in Russia involving Pakistan and China in the context of Afghanistan. So they are adopting an approach to Pakistan somewhat different from what they have done earlier. Similarly, because of the difficulties in their relations with US and Europe, they become even more dependent in China. So all this will certainly give us some cause for concern, and I'm sure our Prime Minister would like to understand that looking several years down the line, how does the Russian president see its various relationships, see the global context, and how does he want to define the relationship with India?
So all of those issues of mutual interest to be discussed in the larger framework of a long-term, broader perspective, of course, with the aim of strengthening ties, as the Prime Minister also put it before taking off for Sochi. We're going to leave it there for the moment. Ambassador Arun Singh, thanks very much. Of course, WION will be keeping our viewers abreast with the latest coming in on that visit of the Indian Prime Minister. That will remain our continuing focus here in our later editions as well.